How do you set a movie nowhere in particular? Coriolanus is one of Shakespeare's most underrated plays, and one of his least popular. And it's not hard to see why. I mean, it's tough to stage, the fifth act has pacing problems, and it's a play about Romans that has neither famous Romans or cannibalism. But that obscurity has changed in recent years, thanks in part to one well-received staging of the play with professional British movie villain Tom Hiddleston in the lead role, and this relatively small but likewise well-received film adaptation starring professional British movie villain Ralph Fiennes, who also directed the movie. It was his directorial debut, and it's a good one. This is a pretty obscure play about a pretty obscure piece of history, so I'll give a quick rundown of the plot. Our lead is a Roman general named Caius Marcius, who loves war more than he loves literally anything else, with the scars to prove it.
He had, before this last expedition, 25 wounds upon him.
Now it's 27.
Horcruxes, every last one! Rome is still in its early days, when it has yet to conquer all of Italy, let alone the entire ancient world. Public order is weak and the people are starving. Rome's main enemies are the Volsces, an Italic city-state mostly known for their roaming bands of soldiers and various white trash mobs. Their leader, Aufidius, shares a mutual hate boner with Marcius, and so they West Side Story for a bit. Also, Aufidius is played by Gerard Butler, who, and a great stretch for him, plays the hyper-violent warlord of an ancient Mediterranean city-state. After taking the Volscian town of Corioli, Marcius is given the cognomen of Coriolanus.
Bear the audition nobly ever.
Upon returning home, his mother, here played by Vanessa Redgrave, encourages him to run for consul. He does, and fails spectacularly, partially because of a smear campaign, but mostly because he openly hates his voter base.
Common cry of curse, whose breath I hate as reeks of the rotten fens, whose loves I prize as the dead carcasses of unburied men that do corrupt my air.
In politics, we call that a gaffe. After telling the people of Rome that they smell bad, he's exiled and he goes back to his only love, Aufidius.
Let me twain my arms about that body.
Kiss.
Know thou, I loved the maid I married.
Kiss.
Never man sighed truer breath, but that I see thee here.
Kiss.
Thou noble thing.
Kiss.
What dances my rapt heart than when I first my wedded mistress saw bestride my threshold.
Kiss. He turns coat and joins the Volsces, shocking his former allies in Rome. His family meets with him, and they persuade him to end the fight and come home. They finally reach his heart and remind him that it's possible to live with peace. And so, he signs a peace treaty between Rome and the Volsces, ending the conflict. As a result, Aufidius wails at him for giving in to his softer emotions, and for betraying the Volsces, he kills him. He uses a knife because the nearest bottomless pit was like a 3-hour drive from there, so. Of all the movies we're going to talk about, this one is easily the straightest. Oh, you know what I mean. It's one of the million adaptations of Shakespeare done in modern day by pedigreed British actors delivering the text clearly and fully. But it would be too easy to call it normal. For one thing, Coriolanus isn't normal, especially in the Shakespearean canon. The most interesting thing about the play is how modern it is. One of his few plays that deals directly with the drama of democracy, rather than the drama of aristocracy. And more than that, it deals with the seemingly modern phenomenon of officials undone by public opinion. So many of Shakespeare's characters have to answer to God or their king, or, as Marcius does here, his family. But only rarely do they answer to the people. That also feeds into a problematic reading, considering how much Coriolanus hates the idea of popular rule.
We debase the nature of our seats and make the rabble call our cares fears, which will, in time, break ope the locks of the Senate and bring in the crows to peck the eagles. Come!
In fact, some people have read the play as proto-fascist. And when I say some people, I mean actual fascists have read the play as proto-fascist. The play was widely taught in Nazi Germany in classes on literature. Coriolanus was seen as a war hero betrayed by a weak, petty, and ungrateful democracy who couldn't accept him as a strong and righteous leader. And of course, we all know what the German word for leader is. I mean, there's a very, very good reason why the bad guy in the Hunger Games is named Coriolanus Snow. And it's not hard to go a little Godwin on this film, considering that its star got famous for playing both wizard Nazis and Nazi classic flavor. But the play can also be read as leftist rather than rightist. During the American Revolution, while royalist armies amused themselves with productions of plays about English history, Coriolanus, a story about democracy, was enjoyed by continental armies. And while the Nazis sided with the military, another German, the great playwright Bertolt Brecht, sided with the proletariat, working on a never-to-be-finished rewrite which played up the cries of the Roman people as an authentic voice of dissent. Another great playwright, Englishman John Osborne, did his own rewrite of Coriolanus, a version in which the lead is driven mad by visions of war. He never produced it, but its title would last: A Place Calling Itself Rome. Ralph Fiennes must have known this play because, well, look at this opening. So, not New York, not Uttar Pradesh, not Mount Fuji, definitely not Rome, not even bizarro Rome. It's simply a place that calls itself Rome. An abstract everywhere. As I said before, that's a lot easier to do in theater, but this film clearly wants to be viewed with a very modern sense of realism. Lots of handheld camera, which today is usually an easy trick to make the film feel like a documentary. Because, shaky cam equals real. Again, the Hunger Games did this. So if you set a film in no place, how do you make that place feel real? By borrowing. Borrowing enough from everywhere to make a recognizable world. Titus also did a lot of borrowing, but it did so to disorient. While Tamor borrows in the abstract, Fiennes borrows in the concrete to create a solid, recognizable world. One part of that world? Political drama. Plenty of hallmarks of modern political dramas. Snappy dialogue in snazzy rooms, lots of Sorkinian walking and talking, and more handheld camera to make it feel like a quasi-political documentary. A style which goes back to this documentary about political fixing. A style which followed into mockumentary about political fixing. Also, part of me really, really wishes that this actor was cast due to his remarkable resemblance to an Irish Peter Capaldi.
By Jove, it would be my mind.
It is a mind that shall remain a poison where it is not poison any further.
Shall remain. Hear you, this Triton of the minnows.
Yeah, Shakespeare's good at insults, but he's no Armando Iannucci.
Allow me to jaunty little on your purview and ram out of the lubricated.
Also, in a clever move, Fiennes updated the exposition scenes. Shakespeare often used messengers to show exposition. Modern movies love to give that job to newscasters. And so,
to see him and the blind to hear him speak. Matrons flung gloves, ladies and maids their
if you're British, you probably recognize this man as the Jon Snow who actually knows something.
The Commons made a shower and thunder with their caps and shouts. I never saw the like.
The media landscape in Coriolanus is designed to evoke contemporary British television, from the sets to the talking heads. The military uniforms, both dress uniforms and combat fatigue, are British in design. All of the lead actors are British, save for the American, who is not Bryce Dallas Howard. The film was funded by BBC Films. We can just safely call this a British Coriolanus, right? 'Cause no British people have ever done Shakespeare before. God, kind of bad idea to do this as a theme. Again, there is no normal. It's all a construct. This ain't Britain, it's a place calling itself Rome. And even if it was Britain, dealing with food shortages and constant violence and belligerent neighboring governments isn't something familiar to most Brits. But in Belgrade, where most of the film was shot, that was a reality. The buildings here are still bombed out. This chamber, used for scenes in the Roman Senate, is an actual Serbian government building. Milosevic likely worked in these halls. These alleys have known gunfire. Images of combat are punctuated with news broadcasts, showing scenes not too different from Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, or in a more recent current event, the Arab Spring. This movie is set in a world of headlines. But what do those headlines say? War hero shamed by mob? Rising dictator ousted? I mean, Fiennes had to build his world, but now he has to tell a story in it, so What's that story? Well, I don't think Fiennes' Coriolanus is supposed to be seen as a Democrat or a fascist or even a politician. I think he's only supposed to be seen as a soldier.
What must I say? Look, sir, my wounds, I got them in my country's service.
Oh, me, the gods, you must not speak like that. You must desire them to think upon you.
Think upon me. Hang 'em. I would they would forget me.
Back to those Revolutionary War stagings. The poet Jonathan M. Sewell wrote an epilogue for continental performances of Coriolanus in 1778, ending with a plea to, essentially, support our troops. Learn hence, my countrymen, Rome's guilt to shun, for honor, justice, gratitude be known. Nor let your unrewarded sons complain, they wield the sword and fight and bleed in vain. But keep stern Coriolanus still in view, impartial justice steadily pursue, and to each warrior give a warrior's due. Of course, this sentiment hasn't gone away. Just look at YouTube comments on the Common Cry of Curs speech. All soldiers feel like this every day. This is what happens when a nation turns its back on its defenders. And even sound like a bunch of liberals being angry at a war hero at Dakota Meyer or Chris Kyle. Chris Kyle, remember, was the subject of Clint Eastwood's American Sniper, a film which either humanized a war hero or lionized a bloodthirsty racist, depending on your attitude to American military action in Iraq, I suppose. And yes, I know I'm using YouTube comments as a barometer for humanity, but this is worth talking about. There is a huge gap between military life and civilian life, and every soldier has known that since Homer first told a story about a man's impossibly long journey to come home from war. And Fiennes must know that, because his performance and direction of Coriolanus doesn't seem to blame the hungry masses, or the scheming politicians, or his long-suffering family. It may be all of them to a degree, but ultimately, none of them can be blamed more than Coriolanus himself. That relationship to Aufidius? No, I'm not joking here, this is deliberate. The most erotic tension in the play is between Coriolanus and Aufidius, and it's non-existent between him and his wife. His passion rages for his enemies and not for his loved ones. It's his failure to reintegrate into society that's his downfall. His awkwardness, his trauma, his failure to comprehend the language of peace when he only speaks war fluently. Actually, this version of Coriolanus isn't unlike another movie that came out a few years before it. The Hurt Locker is all about this separate military world. Its lead character also struggles with returning to civilian life, and he prefers the world of war to the world of peace, despite all the scars that war gave him. In fact, The Hurt Locker shares a cinematographer with Coriolanus. It also shares an actor. Of course, The Hurt Locker was based on a journalistic account. It was about a man's time spent with real soldiers in a real war. Coriolanus is a film based on a 400-year-old play adapted from an historical incident that happened about 2,000 years before the playwright was born. It's further removed from combat than The Hurt Locker, but it still uses that film's ethos and appearance to form a skin for this play, taking an old story about a broken soldier and reframing it as a new story about an equally broken soldier. Now, I've never served. Of course, neither has Ralph Fiennes. And as far as we know, neither did Shakespeare. Most people in this film are far removed from the realities of war, like most people in the West are. Here, an all-volunteer army is the norm, and wars tend to be fought on foreign soil rather than domestic. The gulf between military life and civilian life is only getting wider, not just in popular discourse, but psychologically. There's already plenty of research done about PTSD, and in recent years, the concept of moral injury has also been proposed to describe the self-condemnation felt by soldiers who witnessed or even committed acts offensive to their moral codes. Shakespeare died centuries before these concepts were created, of course, but he still seems to understand their effects. Coriolanus couldn't convey his time at war to the people, or to the Senate, or even to his own family. He's not one of Shakespeare's most articulate heroes. He can't quite say how he's been changed by war. He only knows that there's a world outside of peace.
There is a world elsewhere.
A world that would eventually kill him. For Coriolanus' family, to return to a life of battle is madness. But for other warriors, to accept peace is a sign of weakness.
Perfidiously, he hath betrayed your business and given up for certain drops of salt. Your city, Rome.
Hearest thou, Mars?
Name not the god, thou boy of tears.
The revelatory experience of war is also an alienating one. Maybe this is one of the few ways a civilian can convey the experience, through fiction, through metaphor. I've talked a lot about nationality in these adaptations, but genre is just as important. Not just America, India, Japan, and Italy, but the Broadway musical, the Bollywood crime epic, the jidaigeki, the commedia grottesco, and here, the war movie. We approach the lived experience of soldiers not by talking about Iraq or Afghanistan, but by talking about a place that calls itself Rome. Maybe Coriolanus can only talk about war by setting itself in a war movie. Now, the war movie has a long history that spans decades and nations, so stories about soldiers aren't at all new. The war film is an entire genre with its own conventions and subgenres and cliches. But as a genre, it's grounded in reality. It's based on real conflicts and dramatizes real lived experience. But not all genre films do that. Some genre films don't speak to any lived experience. So next episode, we'll look at Shakespeare in an unreal setting. Next, Shakespeare goes sci-fi.